What's going on, everyone? This is Damon from CCID GFX, and in this tutorial I'm going to go over how to do an organic growth animation using Octane Scatter that looks something like this. So let's get started. First things first, we're going to start with a sphere. I'm going to turn on garage shading with lines, make it icosahedron, and I think we'll go with 50 segments. And then we will grab a displacer object, put it as a child of our sphere, go into our shading, add some noise, and in the noise we're going to use wavy turbulence, make it 300 by, say, 80, and then we're going to go into our object, we're going to go to intensity, and we're going to crank this sucker up. It's like 250. Now that doesn't look very well. I mean, it looks kind of organic, I guess, but not really. Doesn't look good. So how we're going to fix that is we are going to put that inside of a smoothing, or we're going to add a smoothing object, and we're going to see, go to about 80 on the stiffness, about 20 on the iterations. Now we can get a little smoother with this if we want, and that's something we can add in for the final animation, but I wouldn't recommend while setting up to do this. But that would obviously be subdivision surface, which makes it really nice and smooth. But again, for our purposes in setting this up, it's going to be very heavy, so we'll turn that off for now. We're going to set our frames to 300 because we're going to make a 10-second animation at 30 frames per second. We're going to go back into our displacer, back into our shading, back into our noise. We're going to add animation speed of 1 with a loop of 1. And the reason we do that is so we get this. Then we're going to go back up 1, and we're going to go into our fall off. We're going to add a sphere fall off. We're going to make it about 250, 250, 250, and crank up our fall off. And then if you see, that's going to give us our desired effect. So what we're going to grab now, we're going to go to our coordinates, go back to the very beginning, and we're going to set this puppy to, I don't know, minus 350. Makes it about at the beginning of it. Yeah, pretty much at the beginning of it. And then go to our final frame and set it at 350. We're also going to, in our timeline, set it to linear interpolation. And if you want to get your timeline, I have mine set up in here. You just go to Window, Timeline, and it'll do the same thing. So let's go ahead and we'll pause this because it'll slow it down. So if we go through this, pretty cool, organic, fluidy. Also, if we want to, you know, what's cool about the displacer is it is parametric in the sense where, let's see, let's change things. Something to like really shoot out. There we go. Something that kind of shoots out in there. Let's see. We'll keep that like that. So we've got that. And yeah, we can, again, we'll check it with the subdivision. Animates pretty fast, but once we get the cloner on there or the scatter on there, that's when things will slow down. But we may turn it back on for final rendering. So we're going to leave this here for now. And we're going to add a Octane Scatter, where if you don't have your setup on the side like mine, you can go over into your live viewer window, go to Objects, go to Octane Scatter, and add an Octane Scatter. We're going to drag this sphere into the scatter, which will now by default, Octane Scatter creates spheres on whatever you're scattering it on. But obviously, if you want to scatter different things, which we're going to use spheres in this instance, you want to grab a sphere, drop it in there. It's going to go crazy for a second because the spheres are really big. I'm going to drop this down to about maybe this icosahedron. And again, depending on the speed of your computer, you're going to depend. I mean, you may not need to have it all up at 15. I'm just doing it so that they're nice and smooth. And then we're going to change this to surface, which already kind of offsets things. Now, this is something I recently asked about online, because one problem that Octane Scatter has is it doesn't animate over a surface well. It'll pop around. So if we kind of turn this on, I don't know if you can tell or not. Well, they're not really doing it yet. They're actually sticking to it, which is odd and nice. But once we get into the more of the animation, you might start to notice the popping. But this might not work. It could just be a fluke. So we're going to add about 5,000 of those guys. I think maybe it's when you're animating them themselves. Scale these guys up. We're going to add noise in here. For the noise, we're going to choose electric, and we're going to leave it at default for now. We might even change the seed so it's not standard. Now, what's cool about Octane Scatter is it works with C4D's native effectors. So if we go in here and add a plane effector, it's not going to do anything, because the only caveat is even if you hold down Alt, it's not going to automatically become like with a cloner it would. So you have to go into the effectors, drag it in there. You'll see everything kind of goes nuts. Also, I'm going to change my my view here to square 2K. Just gives us more room to work with. So we're going to go into our plane effector. In the parameter, we're going to turn off the position, check the scale, check uniform scale. We're going to go -1. And then in the same fashion, it has its own fall off. So we'll set this fall off to sphere. And it'll come back. Do the same thing. We'll set this size to 250. And we're going to leave the fall off at 50% there. So then with that one, now you can kind of see the movement. So we're going to do the same positioning and keyframing. So the coordinates, we're going to go -350. Set a keyframe. Go to the end. Go to 350. Set a keyframe. Also in the fall off, what you want to do is you want to hit invert. So that way it draws them on instead of the opposite of when it's off. Also in the scatter, what we're going to do in the distribution is we're just going to add like 5 keep away. It kind of helps a little bit. But that creates a little more gaps in between it. So in order to fill those gaps, we're going to copy our scatter by holding Control Drag. And we're going to make these spheres a little smaller. We'll change the seed and add a lot more of them. And basically leave everything the same. So now we have a bunch of little guys in there. And I think we can even go bigger on these spheres. Like maybe we'll go up to 10. Wait, we don't need to. 1 second. So something else that you can do, and again, this looks really great for what it is, for how it's set up. This is totally doable. Like, you don't need to really do anything special. But if you happen to have Grayscale Gorilla's Signal plugin, which I do, you can actually animate the size of the spheres that are cloning on so that they're pulsating while they're moving across. So in order to do that, you can go up to Tags or right-click and go to Signal. And we're going to grab the scale, drop that in there. For modifiers, we're going to add a sign, and we're going to turn off all the negative and positives and turn these up to 5. Now we've got some really nice big sizes, and they'll change size. And we'll do the same thing for our little guys. Right click, signal, grab our scale, click on that, set that to sign, negative, 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 and make those bigger as well. And the same thing will happen, which just gives us a bit of a more insane organic feel to it. Let's go ahead and add a camera and turn it on, and we'll reset the PSR. In the camera settings, I want to go with a 20mm focal lens. So the coordinates, drag back on the Z. And the way you want to test the maximum, distance you want to have is, like, for instance, that goes outside. We want to keep this framed in. So we'll drag this back. So everything stays within the frame. Then we'll go into our settings and we'll turn on the imager. I'm just going to set this up now so I don't forget. I'm going to choose Ektachrome in this. Again, this is all about aesthetic. This is about what you want in your, how you want yours to look. This is just how I'm setting up mine, showing it to you guys. So now we're going to add a Octane Sky, which is going to basically turn everything off so you can't see it. And then we're going to add a Torus. Set this to Z. Expand it up. And thin it out a bit. 20 maybe. Doesn't really matter. Go with 500 for now. And we will add an emissive texture to it. So in our texture, go ahead and add a black body emission. Surface brightness, and we'll make that a little yellowish. Now we've got our basic lighting set up. What we're going to do now is we're going to start making the materials. But what I want to make sure I do is make sure we are in the right kernel. Because if we're using specular material, you don't really want to be... You can do it, but direct lighting, it's just not going to look as good. You're not going to get the penetration. So we're going to switch over to path tracing. And we're going to just do some arbitrary settings for a moment. Obviously, these are things that are going to vary on your scene and your computer. Turn on AI light. And there we go. So let's go ahead and start with our first texture. We're going to grab a specular material. We're going to apply it to our sphere. It's kind of going to get shiny and disappear. We're going to turn a camera off here so you can actually see what's going on. We're also going to turn off our scatters for now. So first things first, we are going to make sure check fake shadows is on. In roughness, we're going to add about 0.1. And then we are going to go into our medium and add a scattering medium. For this, we're going to probably bring it down to about 25. Make our volume step length about 6. About 0.9 on that. And then we're going to add an RGB spectrum. Copy that down into this guy. You can just drag and copy it. Then we're going to make this guy like a bluish color. Now what I found out when messing around with this is in order to get the color matters for how the thickness, I guess you could say, the penetration, the scattering. So I found when I was doing this, when I was practicing that, this was a good one. And then what I ended up doing in order to light the inside, let's turn our camera back on, is I actually added an Octane light, where again I have mine set up here, but you can go to Objects, Lights, just an Octane area light. And in these settings, I changed it to a sphere. So now you can kind of see how we're doing this lighting. And then because I added a light inside, that's the blue is actually causing it to be red, which is interesting. We're actually going to go in here and change this to, I think, 2500, which is going to change that a bit, which really doesn't matter, honestly. But and then go back into our material here, go into our transmission, and in the texture here, we're going to add a gradient. And then in the gradient, we're going to change it to 3D spherical, add a little bit of turbulence. Also, we're going to turn our camera off again so we can kind of see this better. I'm going to drag this over now so we can actually see what's going on. For this color, we're going to grab like a nice, bright, like, well, kind of just a faded yellow. The inside, and over here, we're going to do like a, almost like a flesh tone of pink. And then we're going to go up, we're going to add some bump. So for the bump, we're going to add noise. And for the noise, we're going to grab electric. And we can leave it at the default. Again, it's personal taste. It depends on how, you feel about it. I think we're going to crank this light up a little bit. We're also going to add a octane tag so we don't actually have to see that in our render or in the thing. I think that was actually might be too much orange on that guy. Yeah, that was supposed to be yellow. This one's the one that's supposed to be really, really orange. Alright, so then now you can see what happens. We're also going to do a little bit of keyframing for our lights. So for our actual light inside, I'm going to keyframe the size of it. So at the beginning and the end, the light will be the size it is now at 100 centimeters. And then at 150 in the middle, when this thing's kind of large and blown up, we're going to make this guy 200. So you can kind of see through it a bit. And it gives that lighting effect from the inside. See if there's anything else. Let's maybe, the index is good, I think. We may turn the reflection down on the bubbles, but we might even do it on this too, because we don't really want it more like skin, not really like shiny. So let's go ahead and turn our first scatter on. And for that one, we're gonna copy this and drag it onto our sphere. But we're going to change a few of the settings. We're going to change the color a little bit. So if we go in here, we're going to change this to like a green. Because I personally wanted like a green kind of color to it. So it looks like it's infected when it's animating. And then we'll change this to kind of like a fleshy, I don't know, like pink color for the scattering. Maybe, let's see, turn this up. Maybe a bit. There we go. And then we'll do the same thing for the scatter. We'll just add this texture on there. Oh, I messed up my camera. There we go. And again, you can pretty much, choose a lot of your own things. Like that might be a little too green, so we might bring that back down a bit. Like it might be really just too green. Just you want a little bit of tinting to it. So it kind of just... But you want something different. So also, something you can also do is, in the beginning, if you want, you can make this so it looks almost like a perfectly clear kind of color. So what we would do is, for instance, in our light, our ring light, we would go in here and let's see, we'll save it where it's supposed to be at 150, and we'll keyframe these two guys. Then we'll go back to 0, we'll go to 100, and put this back to white at 6500. And do the same thing in the final keyframe. Keyframe those. And then we'll do the same thing for our light. We'll go to 150, have the settings where they're at, and then we'll go back to 0, set this to 100, and 6500. And then we have to go in and change this material in our scattering medium. Basically, we'll just go again. We'll go to 150. Keep this color here. Go to 0 and just drag this to white. Keyframe it. Go to the last frame. Drag this to white. And keyframe it. Make sure there's nothing else going on here. Let's see. It might be the transmission. I know there's a lot of extra keyframing, but, you know. So what you can do in here is, let's go into our gradient, and then same thing. You can keyframe it. So we'll go to 150, keyframe it where it's at, back to 0, drag this to white, drag this to white. And keyframe it. And then we could probably actually, for our light inside, we can keep that probably bright if we wanted to, so you can see a little better. Alright, so we start with this kind of basic, you know, sphere thing. We can even turn the roughness on if we want to animate the roughness, which is kind of neat as well. So we go to 150, keep our roughness there, go to 0, and go to, like, I don't know, maybe 0.01. And this is getting pretty in depth for what you want to do, but I'm just kind of showing you different options for stuff that you can do. And then you also got to go back into our scattering. Back into our scattering, and I totally messed up our scattering. There we go. And basically you take this down to 0. But then, or maybe like 5. Either way, you can get this general look here, and then as we begin to animate through, you start seeing the color coming in, and it looks more like an infected, blobby, organic growth animation. When we get to 150, you can see all the different colors. So then basically how you render this out is going to depend, again, on your computer with the settings. You can add more, like with specular depth. You know, you can go up to 10, and it's going to change a little bit. Change how everything looks. You're going to get better specular, but 5 works for this situation. You know, and it's really good. I mean, I rendered, I think, the original out at around this, but I think I might have gone up to, you know, 2K, but you're still getting a decent amount of render times. Now, if we were to go back, for instance, like this doesn't look too bad. Like, honestly, it doesn't look really all that bad. You can't tell. It's still got some pretty smooth. But if you wanted to, you could add the subdivision in. But honestly, it's just going to add to your render time. So, yeah, here we go. We got an organic growth animation using Octane Scatter. And so what we did in this is we set up the animation using a displacer and smoothing effectors. And then we also used Octane Scatter with some spheres, used a little bit of Grayscale Gorilla, and then we went over how to set up our textures and our lighting and our camera, and we got a pretty cool result. So, as usual, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please let me know. I'm CCID GFX pretty much everywhere online, especially on Facebook. You can find me in the Motion Designers Community Discord, on the mograph.com Slack, and in Facebook in the different various groups, whether it's Cinema 4D, Octane, etc. And then, obviously, in the YouTube channel. Give it a like, or if there's something that I didn't go over well enough or explain, feel free to hit me up and let me know. You know, I want to make sure that everybody got out of this what they wanted or needed. So yeah, I guess all I have to say is, again, my name is Damon from CCID GFX. This was an organic growth animation tutorial, and until next time, have a good one.